She lost 60 pounds from just one leg, and yet the wound wouldn't stop leaking. Doctors told her she might lose her limb. Strangers looked at her like a monster. And her daughter? She had to be the nurse. At just 13 years old, how does a mother keep going when even her own body is turning against her? This isn't just a story about pain. It's about fighting back when the world has already counted you out. If you're someone who believes in second chances or need one yourself, subscribe now. This story might just change the way you see strength. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room cast a harsh white glow over everything. Machines, walls, faces. A gurney rolled in fast, the wheels clattering against the linoleum. Tiffany Howe lay motionless, her skin pale, her breathing shallow. Nurses moved in a flurry of efficiency, attaching leads, calling out vitals. A monitor began beeping erratically. "She's crashing," one of the nurses shouted. "BP is dropping. 72/38. Push 2 milligrams of norepinephrine," the attending physician barked. "Let's keep her stable." Tiffany's eyes fluttered open briefly. Her vision was blurry, reduced to shapes and light. Somewhere in the chaos, she heard a voice, not the voice of a nurse or a doctor, but one soft and familiar. "Mom, please, wake up, Naya." The edges of her vision darkened like a tunnel collapsing. Then, the world fell silent, 3 months earlier. It was the kind of morning that held stillness like a secret. The sky outside the window was gray, not quite raining, but heavy with the possibility. Tiffany sat on the edge of her recliner, a wool blanket draped over her lap. Though the chill in the room came more from within her than from outside. She looked down at her left foot, wrapped in layers of gauze, now faintly stained. A faint yellow seep had pushed through the cloth. The smell was faint but always present, a mix of iron and rot, and something she could no longer even describe. "This thing doesn't belong to me," she whispered. "It's like it was attached to me by someone else, someone cruel." Her fingers traced the contour of her shin, where the swelling had morphed flesh into an almost alien shape. The skin was taut and glossy, stretched to its limit. Her toes, or what used to be toes, poked from the bottom like bloated nubs. Every morning began like this, an inventory of what hurt, what leaked, what cracked. And every morning she waited for the pain to settle into the background before she dared to stand. From the kitchen, the sound of cereal pouring into a bowl echoed. Naya was already awake, getting ready for school. Tiffany exhaled slowly, bracing herself. She pulled herself up using the armrest. Pain radiated from her foot to her spine. She winced but didn't cry out. She had long since stopped screaming. Pain, when it came every day, became less an enemy and more a roommate. Uninvited, yes, but no longer shocking. She limped toward the bathroom, careful not to let the bandage brush the carpet. Blood had soaked through once before, and the cleanup had taken hours. Naya had tried to help, but she was only 14. Tiffany wouldn't let her daughter see more than she had to. She caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her face looked older than 41. Hollowed eyes, pale lips, skin dulled from years of steroids, antibiotics, sleepless nights. But it was her expression, somewhere between resignation and rebellion, that stood out the most. She reached for the small photo frame taped to the corner of the mirror. It showed her younger self, holding baby Naya in her arms, both laughing. Back then, her feet were normal. Her life was too. "You used to dance," she whispered to the woman in the picture. "Now you bargain just to walk across the room." Back in the living room, Naya poked her head out from the kitchen. "You okay, Mom?" Tiffany nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, baby. Just a slow morning." Naya walked over, backpack slung over one shoulder. Her eyes scanned Tiffany's leg, the way she always did. Tiffany hated that glance, part concern, part calculation. The girl had learned to read her mother's pain like a weather forecast. "Want me to change the bandages before I go?" Tiffany shook her head. "I'll do it after you leave. You said that yesterday, and I did it." Tiffany lied. Naya sighed, kissed her mom's forehead, and grabbed her coat. "Text me if you need anything." "I always need something," Tiffany muttered after the door closed. She lowered herself back onto the recliner, slowly lifting her leg onto a pillow. The pressure of elevation helped, but only barely. The throbbing was constant now. Some days it was a dull ache. Other days, it felt like her bones were trying to punch through her skin. The worst part wasn't the pain. It was the leaking. It never stopped. Sometimes it was a trickle. Other times it soaked through socks and bandages within hours. It smelled. It embarrassed her. It isolated her. She remembered a time, nearly 2 decades ago, when the swelling had been minor, a puffiness in her ankle after a long day. A doctor had called it harmless fluid retention. She believed him. She'd gone home, taken ibuprofen, propped her feet up. Now here she was, alone in a small house, her daughter growing up too fast, her body decaying from the bottom up. The front door creaked open. Tiffany's heart jumped, then relaxed when Naya called out, "Forgot my phone!" She came in, grabbed the phone from the counter, and paused. "Are you sure you don't want me to stay today?" Tiffany offered the same brave smile she'd been perfecting for years. "No, honey, go. Be a kid." But as the door shut again, and silence settled once more, Tiffany leaned her head back, eyes closed. In 3 months, she would be in an ER, unconscious, her life hanging by a thread. She didn't know it yet, but the countdown had already begun. Tiffany was 6 years old when she first noticed her body wasn't like the other kids. It was a humid summer afternoon in Missouri, the kind where the air clung to your skin and cicadas sang their shrill symphonies. She had just come in from chasing fireflies with the neighbor boys, her white socks caked in mud and grass, when she realized her left ankle looked different. It was swollen, not just a little puffy from running around barefoot all day, but noticeably larger, tight and tender, like something was inside pushing out. When she pointed it out to her mother, Evelyn, the woman barely glanced up from the dishwater. "You've probably just twisted it," she said, drying her hands on her apron. "Stop running so hard and put some ice on it." But Tiffany hadn't twisted it, and the swelling didn't go away. Over the next few months, the ankle would puff up slightly after long days. Sometimes, it would leave deep sock marks, or feel heavier than the other. But her mother insisted it was nothing serious. Evelyn, a single mom who worked nights as a nurse's aide, had little time, or tolerance, for complaints that didn't draw blood or break bones. "She's just retaining water," Evelyn told the pediatrician at Tiffany's annual checkup. "She's a healthy girl otherwise." The doctor nodded and scribbled something on his chart without even examining the leg. So Tiffany believed it too. She grew up thinking it was normal to have one leg that swelled when you were tired. She learned to hide it with pants, never wore shorts on gym day, and sat out of school dances that required heels. The other girls never noticed, at least not enough to say anything. In a town of 2,000 people, you learned early how to disappear in plain sight. Then, at 15, everything changed. Evelyn had been coughing for weeks. At first, she blamed the dust in the old house, the changing seasons, stress from the hospital. But when she started coughing up blood, Tiffany knew it wasn't the weather. 2 months later, Evelyn was diagnosed with late-stage lung cancer. Tiffany became her mother's caretaker almost overnight. She cooked, cleaned, filled prescriptions, drove her to chemo in a borrowed car. And when Evelyn's hair began to fall out in clumps, it was Tiffany who shaved the rest off in silence, biting her lips so hard it bled. Evelyn passed away just after Tiffany turned 16. There was no father to speak of. Tiffany had never known his name. A distant aunt in Kansas offered to take her in, but Tiffany refused. She lied about her age to finish high school, took up part-time work in the evenings, and rented a basement room from an old woman who charged her $25 a week. And through it all, her leg kept swelling. By now, it wasn't just her ankle. Some days, her entire calf felt tight, like a balloon filling too fast. But she'd gotten used to the discomfort. She'd gotten used to everything, really. Loss, loneliness, the dull ache in her bones. She wore longer skirts, avoided swimming pools, and stopped bringing it up to doctors. They never listened anyway. At 19, she landed a full-time job at a community bank. She liked the routine, balancing drawers, greeting regulars, the click of polished heels on tile floors. It gave her a sense of control, of structure, in a life that had been anything but. That's where she met Michael, one of the security contractors who came in every Tuesday morning to pick up the deposit bags. He had kind eyes and a soft laugh. He noticed her limp once and asked about it, not with pity, but curiosity. She brushed it off, and he didn't press. That was the first time she realized how desperately she wanted someone to accept her body, without asking questions. They started dating, cautiously at first. Tiffany didn't let him see her undress for months, but he was patient. He listened to her stories about Evelyn. He laughed at her dry humor. He didn't treat her like she was broken. At 24, Tiffany got pregnant. The news was a shock. She hadn't planned on being a mother so soon. But something in her shifted the moment she felt that flutter in her belly. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was preparing for something greater than herself. Michael proposed, but Tiffany said no. Not because she didn't love him, but because deep down she feared her body might not hold up. That it might betray her in some permanent way. She gave birth to Naya in the spring of her 25th year. It was a long labor, and the doctors noted some fluid retention in her lower limbs afterward, but said it was common postpartum swelling. Tiffany knew better. The weight in her legs wasn't just postpartum. It was familiar. It had been waiting quietly for its time to return. Motherhood, for all its chaos and exhaustion, gave Tiffany a sense of purpose she had never known before. Naya was a colicky baby, prone to crying fits at 2 a.m. and impossible to swaddle just right. But Tiffany adored her with a depth that surprised even herself. She returned to work at the bank after 12 weeks, juggling diapers, night feedings, and 8-hour shifts with the quiet endurance of someone who had learned long ago not to expect help. Michael stayed around at first. He came over on weekends, held Naya while Tiffany cooked, talked about maybe getting a place together. But as the months passed, his visits grew less frequent. He said the right things, smiled in all the photos, but his eyes were already halfway out the door. By the time Naya turned 2, he had moved to another state. He sent a birthday card that year. He didn't call. Tiffany didn't cry. She didn't even tell Naya about him until she was old enough to ask. Instead, she focused on being 2 people at once, mother and provider. She budgeted every cent, cut coupons religiously, made baby food from scratch, and worked overtime whenever she could find a sitter. She was tired, always, but her love for Naya lit something fierce in her. It made every sacrifice worth it. But while she was giving her daughter everything, her body was quietly taking something away. By the time Naya was in preschool, Tiffany's left leg had begun to ache more often. It wasn't the dull, manageable discomfort she remembered from her teens. It was sharper now, deeper, like a fist clenching inside her calf. There were days when her foot felt like it belonged to someone else. It would swell unpredictably, throb without reason. She began keeping extra shoes in the car because some days, the ones she wore in the morning no longer fit by lunch. She avoided doctors, partly because of cost. Her insurance barely covered anything, but mostly because of fear. She didn't want to hear what she already suspected, that something was wrong. Something big, something she couldn't fix with rest and elevation. So she ignored it. She wrapped her leg tighter, doubled her socks, pretended not to notice when coworkers glanced down at her ankle with mild concern. At home, she waited until Naya was asleep before peeling off her bandages, wincing as the gauze pulled at tender, blistered skin. Then came 2006. She was 32, Naya was 7, and her leg, her entire leg from the knee down, had ballooned into something monstrous. She had caught a glimpse of it in the full-length mirror one morning and recoiled. It was unrecognizable, thick, shapeless, mottled with angry red blotches and taut skin that looked ready to split. Her foot no longer had definition. Her toes barely protruded from the mass. But it wasn't just the size, it was the weight. It felt like carrying a backpack full of bricks attached permanently to her shin. Walking was a chore, stairs were agony, shoes were impossible. She began missing work, then quitting altogether. Even Naya noticed. "Mommy, your leg looks like it's sad," she said one evening, tracing a finger along the swollen ridge of Tiffany's ankle. Tiffany tried to laugh, but it caught in her throat. Eventually, the pain grew so unbearable she couldn't avoid help any longer. She was admitted to the hospital after a particularly bad infection left her feverish and delirious. Tests, scans, and long consultations followed. That's when the diagnosis came, not new but more official than ever: primary lymphedema, congenital but worsening. Years of fluid buildup, years of misdiagnosis and neglect. The doctors recommended a surgical debulking procedure. It would remove the excess tissue and fluid that had accumulated over the years. There were risks: infection, nerve damage, scarring, but Tiffany had no choice. The surgery lasted over 6 hours. When she woke up, her leg was wrapped in thick dressings, elevated on a foam wedge. She was groggy, nauseated, disoriented. A nurse told her they had removed 60 pounds of lymphatic fluid and tissue, from just the knee down to the ankle. 60 pounds. She laughed at first, a short, breathless wheeze. It didn't feel real. How could her body have been carrying that weight every day without collapsing? The recovery was long, Weeks in the hospital, then months of physical therapy. For a brief window of time, things looked better. The swelling was down. She could wear a sneaker again, for the first time in years. She even took Naya to the park one Saturday afternoon and watched her daughter run across the grass like a blur of joy and light. But the relief didn't last. The fluid came back. Not all at once. It started slowly, a faint puffiness after a long day. Then the heaviness returned. Then the itching, the leaking, the wounds. Only this time, they didn't heal. The doctors called it chronic. They said management, not cure. They prescribed compression wraps, diuretics, wound care, custom boots. Tiffany did everything. She followed instructions to the letter, but her body didn't listen. She began leaking constantly. Clear, yellowish fluid that soaked through socks, pants, even sheets. Her skin cracked open in places and refused to close. Sometimes it smelled metallic. Other times, it smelled like death. By 2008, she was draining every single day, and it didn't stop. Tiffany had once believed the worst was behind her. After the surgery in 2006, when they removed 60 pounds of tissue and fluid from her leg, she had felt something close to hope. She remembered looking down at her bandaged foot in the hospital and whispering, "Maybe I'll get my life back now." For a while, it seemed possible. She walked more freely, wore shoes that didn't look like orthopedic prototypes, and even smiled without forcing it. But the hope was short-lived. By the following spring, the swelling began to return, first in the ankle, then creeping up the calf like ivy reclaiming an old wall. The fluid seeped into her tissue with the same relentless weight it had before, and soon the bandages were back. At first, she tried to stay optimistic. She told herself it was just a temporary flare, that her body was still adjusting. But deep down, she knew better. The pain changed. It wasn't just pressure or tightness. It became stabbing, radiating, impossible to ignore. She couldn't sleep on her left side without a burning sensation shooting up her thigh. The skin began to break open in places, tiny fissures that bled and oozed. At first, they were manageable. She kept them clean, changed the gauze religiously, but they spread. They deepened. Within months, her foot became a patchwork of open wounds. She smelled them before she saw them, an acidic, metallic odor that clung to the air like smoke. No amount of disinfectant could cover it. The house began to smell like a wound. She stopped inviting people over. Eventually, she stopped leaving altogether. Her world shrank to a recliner in the living room, a bathroom down the hall, and the corner pharmacy where the clerks knew her by name. Every outing became an ordeal. Strangers stared. Children pointed. One woman in the grocery store whispered, "Is it contagious?" Loud enough for Tiffany to hear. But it wasn't just the public. The real pain came at home. Naya was now 11, old enough to understand things Tiffany had hoped to shield her from. The girl watched with silent worry as her mother limped from room to room, her leg wrapped in bulky dressings that never seemed clean enough. Naya had always been mature for her age, but Tiffany hated how much she'd had to grow up. Sometimes, she caught her daughter staring at her bandaged leg with a mix of fear and helplessness. Once, she heard her crying quietly in the bathroom. When Tiffany knocked, Naya emerged with red eyes and a shaky excuse about shampoo in her eye. She wanted to be strong for her daughter, but her body was failing her. There were days when she couldn't even make it to the kitchen without resting. Her leg would throb and swell, until the skin became shiny and translucent. She started keeping towels beneath her recliner to absorb the fluid that leaked from her leg. It soaked through everything, socks, pants, blankets. It never stopped. She tried compression therapy again, but the pain was unbearable. The pressure from the wraps made her feel like her skin was being peeled from the inside. She begged doctors for solutions, but most of them shrugged and reminded her that lymphedema was incurable. What they didn't say, but she knew, was that her case was getting worse. Much worse. She applied for disability benefits, but was denied twice. Her condition, they said, wasn't severe enough to prevent her from working. She wanted to scream. How could anyone say that from behind a desk? Had they ever tried walking with a rotting limb? Her savings dwindled. Medical supplies piled up. She used old pillowcases as makeshift bandages when she ran out. Nights were the worst. She'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, her leg pulsing like a second heart. The air reeked of infection. Every creak of the house felt like a countdown to something breaking inside her. One night, after another failed appeal from Social Security, she sat in the kitchen long after Naya had gone to bed. The table was cluttered with rejection letters, unopened bills, and half-finished prescription forms. A dull buzzing echoed in her ears, and she felt lightheaded from the stress. She opened the junk drawer to look for a pen and saw the scissors. They were old, dull kitchen shears she hadn't used in years. Her fingers hovered over them, her breath catching. For a moment, the thought didn't scare her. It felt logical. If the leg was the problem, then remove the problem. She imagined what it would feel like, cutting deep, past the skin, through the layers of ruined tissue. Would it hurt more or less than living like this? She imagined the silence that might follow, the end of the constant dripping, the stench, the shame. Her hand reached out, then soft footsteps. Naya. The girl stood in the hallway, hair messy from sleep, eyes wide. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Tiffany dropped her hand. For a long second, they just stared at each other. Then Naya whispered, "Don't." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't panic. It was something deeper, a tether, a truth. Tiffany blinked, the fog in her mind clearing just enough to feel the weight of what she'd almost done. She looked down at her leg, swollen and bandaged, and then back to her daughter. "I'm sorry," she said, voice breaking. "I'm just tired." Naya crossed the kitchen slowly and wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. She held on tightly, as if trying to keep her from slipping away. "You don't have to do this alone, Mom," she said into her chest. "You still have me." And in that moment, Tiffany knew she couldn't give up. Not yet. The days that followed weren't suddenly easier, but something in Tiffany had shifted. It was as if, by stepping to the edge of despair and turning back, she had touched a deeper strength, one that came not from her body, but from the will to stay for someone else. She started waking up earlier, even if it meant simply sitting by the window and watching the sunrise creep across the floor. It gave her structure, a sliver of normalcy. Naya began helping more around the house, not out of obligation, but with quiet understanding. Each morning, she'd sit beside her mother with a clean towel and a warm basin of water, gently peeling away the soaked bandages, careful not to wince at the wounds beneath. "You don't have to look," Tiffany whispered once, her voice tinged with shame. "I want to," Naya said. "If you can feel it, I can see it." That simple sentence stayed with Tiffany longer than any painkiller. Still, the reality hadn't changed. The wounds didn't heal, the fluid didn't stop. Her leg remained an anchor, weighing down every movement, every plan, every dream. She still couldn't walk without bracing herself against the walls. She still didn't leave the house unless absolutely necessary. She still had no answers. One evening, while Tiffany rested with her leg elevated on the couch, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Kendra, a friend from her old banking days. They hadn't spoken in months, maybe a year. Life had drifted them apart, but the connection was still warm. "Hey Tiff, this popped up on my YouTube feed, and I thought of you instantly. It's wild. The doc in this show treats people with serious foot and leg conditions, like really intense stuff. Check it out." She tapped the link. The video loaded slowly on her outdated phone, pausing every few seconds to buffer. It was a clip from a reality medical series called My Feet Are Killing Me. A middle-aged man was sitting in a clinic, his feet so swollen and deformed they barely resembled limbs. The doctor, calm and clear-spoken, examined him with a level of care Tiffany hadn't seen in years. She watched the entire clip, then another, and another. The doctor's name was Brad Schaefer. He wasn't just treating the wounds, he was treating the people. He listened. He asked real questions. He made them feel human again. Tiffany didn't realize she was crying until a tear slid down her cheek and onto her phone screen. That night she barely slept. She lay in bed, turning the idea over in her mind like a coin, hope on one side, fear on the other. What if it was nothing? What if he couldn't help? What if he looked at her leg and said the same thing everyone else had said? But what if he didn't? By morning, her decision was made. She pulled out her laptop, slow, clunky, but functional, and opened the show's website. There was a contact page for medical inquiries, buried under flashy headlines and pop-up ads. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. What could she even say? She started typing. "Hello, my name is Tiffany Howe. I'm 41 years old and have been living with severe primary lymphedema since I was a child. Over the past few years, my condition has worsened significantly. I have chronic infections, daily fluid drainage, and open wounds that will not heal. I've undergone debulking surgery and multiple failed treatment plans. I'm a single mother. I can't work. I can barely walk. I don't know if you can help me, but I'm running out of options. Thank you for reading. Tiffany." She reread the message twice. It felt raw, exposed, but real. She hesitated before hitting send. Naya appeared at the door, already dressed for school, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "What are you doing?" she asked. Tiffany minimized the window, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing. Just looking something up." Naya tilted her head, eyes narrowing with suspicion, but she didn't push. As she walked past, she stopped and looked back. "You should hit send." Tiffany blinked. "What?" "Whatever you were writing, you looked serious. If it might help you, send it." She stared at the screen for another long second. Then she clicked submit. The email disappeared into cyberspace, swallowed up by code and databases and gatekeepers. She didn't expect to hear back, not really, but for the first time in a long time, she had done something, reached out, asked. Later that night, while Naya was doing homework and the house was quiet except for the buzz of the fridge, Tiffany's phone pinged. One new email. Subject, RE Medical Inquiry, Tiffany Howe. "Hi Tiffany, thank you so much for your message. We're so sorry to hear about everything you've been through. Dr. Schaffer and our team would like to speak with you further about your case. Are you available for a virtual consult this week?" Tiffany stared at the screen. Her chest tightened, not with dread, but something that had almost disappeared completely from her life. Hope. Tiffany spent the next 2 days checking her phone more often than she had in years. Each buzz of a notification made her heart leap, and each one that wasn't from the clinic left her with a small sting of disappointment. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, a miracle, a full recovery plan, or simply someone who would tell her she wasn't crazy for feeling like her body had turned into a prison. On the third day, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Her breath caught. "Hello? Hi, is this Tiffany Howe?" "Yes," she said, sitting upright, her leg immediately protesting the sudden movement. "This is Hannah calling from Dr. Brad Schaefer's office. We received your message and passed your case along to the doctor. He's very interested in speaking with you directly. We'd like to schedule a video consultation if you're available." Tiffany blinked. Yes, absolutely. I'm available." The rest of the call blurred. Times, details, a video link sent to her email. When she hung up, she just stared at the screen, heart thudding like it hadn't in months. Not from fear, but anticipation. 2 days later, she was propped up on the couch, the camera on her laptop adjusted to frame her upper body. She had brushed her hair, put on a bit of makeup. Her leg was still bandaged and elevated off screen, but for the first time in a long while she felt like more than just her illness. Then the screen flickered, and he appeared. Dr. Schaefer was younger than she expected, maybe mid-40s, with kind eyes and a calming voice. There was no stethoscope, no white coat, just him in a quiet room, focused entirely on her. "Hi, Tiffany. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. Thank you for calling. Honestly, I wasn't sure if anyone would even respond to my email. I'm really glad you reached out. I've reviewed what you shared, and it's clear you've been through a lot. Would it be okay if you told me more about what's happening now, in your own words?" Tiffany hesitated. She looked into the webcam and, for the first time, spoke openly about the full extent of what she'd been hiding. She told him about the surgery in 2006, the brief hope, and the slow, devastating return of the swelling. She described the leaking, the open wounds, the infections, the smell. She told him about losing her job, how her world had shrunk to a chair and a towel-covered floor, about Naya, and how she felt like a burden to the one person she loved most. Dr. Schaefer didn't interrupt. He didn't flinch. He nodded gently, and when she finished, he paused before responding. "I want to help you, Tiffany," he said, "but I need to be honest. This is one of the most advanced cases of lymphedema I've seen." Tiffany swallowed. "So there's nothing you can do?" "That's not what I'm saying," he replied quickly. "There's no cure for lymphedema, but there are ways to manage it, and I believe we can improve your quality of life significantly. The key is getting that lymphatic fluid moving again, out of your leg and back into circulation." She leaned in. "How?" "We use a sequential compression device. Think of it like a pump, one that mimics the natural movement of your lymphatic system. It applies pressure in timed intervals, encouraging the fluid to move upward. The results vary, but for many patients, we've seen drastic reduction in swelling and improvement in wound healing." Tiffany stared at the screen. "And I can use it from home?" "Yes, You'd need to use it 3 times a day, about an hour each session. It's a commitment, but it's non-invasive and safe. And most importantly, it can help you start feeling like yourself again. She looked down at her leg, bandaged and bloated. She thought about Naya helping her every morning, the scent that clung to their house, the chair she hadn't left in days. Then she looked back at the screen. "I'll do it," she said. "Whatever it takes." Dr. Schaefer smiled. "Then let's get started." The device arrived in a large cardboard box 2 days later. Tiffany sat on the edge of the couch, watching as Naya carefully unpacked the contents like it was some kind of sacred ritual. Inside were long padded sleeves that looked almost like sleeping bags for legs, coiled tubes, and a small control unit with buttons and a digital display. The instruction manual was thick, but thankfully, a nurse from Dr. Schaefer's clinic had already walked her through the basics on a video call. "It's like a hug machine for your leg," Naya said, smiling as she held up the sleeve. Tiffany managed a laugh. It was nervous, uncertain. Hope and fear danced too closely in her chest. They laid her back on the recliner, elevated her leg, and gently wrapped the sleeve around it. The material was soft but firm, and once zipped, it held her limb in a way that felt protective, almost maternal. Naya double-checked the settings, then pressed start. A low hum filled the room. At first, there was nothing. Then, a gentle pressure at the foot. Light, rhythmic, like someone squeezing slowly and letting go. A minute later, the pressure moved up, into her ankle, then her calf, in smooth pulses. Tiffany gritted her teeth. It wasn't painful, not exactly, but it wasn't pleasant either. Her skin felt raw underneath, and each compression stirred sensations she hadn't felt in years. "You okay, Mom?" Naya asked, kneeling beside her. "Yeah," she lied. "It just feels weird." They sat in silence, watching the numbers tick upward on the machine's timer. Tiffany focused on her breathing, letting the pressure roll over her leg like waves. The first 30 minutes crawled by, but she endured it. At the end of the hour, the device powered down with a soft beep. Tiffany exhaled deeply, her shirt damp with sweat. Naya gently unzipped the sleeve. The skin beneath was red but intact. No bleeding, no new wounds. That in itself felt like a small miracle. "You did it," Naya said. "Round 1, Tiffany replied, already dreading the next 2 sessions. Over the next few days, the routine became their rhythm. Breakfast, treatment, lunch, treatment, dinner, treatment. Naya logged each session in a notebook, alongside measurements of Tiffany's leg. They used a fabric tape measure to track the midfoot, ankle, and calf. At first, the numbers stayed the same. Then, on day 4, something changed. "Midfoot is 42 centimeters, Naya said, blinking. Tiffany looked up from her book. "That's down 1. And the ankle? Wait, 39. That's down 2. Tiffany stared at her daughter, unsure whether to believe it. "Are you sure you're measuring in the same place?" "I marked the spots with a pen," Naya said, grinning. "I know what I'm doing." They both sat in stunned silence for a moment. It wasn't a cure. It wasn't dramatic. But it was something. The next week brought more small victories, less fluid on the towels, less odor in the room. A wound near her shin began to scab over. For the first time in months, Tiffany found herself able to stand, for more than 10 minutes without her leg throbbing like a siren. Her energy returned slowly. She found herself singing along with the radio while Naya cooked. She read more. She opened the curtains every morning. The most surprising change wasn't physical, it was emotional. She began to picture a future again, not one free from illness, she knew better than that, but one where she could attend school plays, walk to the mailbox, maybe even take a small trip with Naya one day. Just the thought made her eyes sting. One evening, after dinner, Naya turned toward her. "You seem lighter," she said. "Not just your leg, but you." Tiffany nodded. "I feel it. It's like carrying bricks for years, and finally someone helps you lift one off." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the dusk settle outside the window. "I want to show Dr. Schaffer our progress," Tiffany said. "Maybe we can do another video call." "I'll take pictures," Naya offered. "We should have before and after shots." Tiffany smiled. "You're hired as my official case manager." "I already was," Naya said, smirking. As they laughed, Tiffany felt something unfurl inside her. A soft, quiet thing she hadn't dared name in years. Possibility. The first week of treatment brought progress, but it also brought a new kind of exhaustion. Tiffany had expected physical discomfort. What she hadn't expected was how relentless it would be. 3 sessions a day, 1 hour each, on top of cleaning wounds, changing bandages, tracking measurements, managing meals, and pretending always that everything was fine, for Naya's sake. By the end of the 2nd week, Tiffany's body felt like it belonged to someone else. Her back ached from sitting upright during treatment. Her arms were sore from lifting her swollen leg into position. Her skin, already sensitive, began reacting to the compression with hot patches of irritation. And her mind was the loudest part. "This is too much," it whispered during the 3rd session each day. "You're not getting better fast enough. You'll never get your life back." Sometimes she believed it. One morning, just before their usual 10 a.m. session, Tiffany peeled off a bandage to find that one of the wounds had reopened. It wasn't bleeding exactly, but it was weeping, and the fluid had a cloudy tint she didn't like. The skin around it looked angry, inflamed. She stared at it for a long time. Not again. She wanted to scream, or cry, or maybe just lie down and sleep for a week. Instead, she slowly reached for the antiseptic. Her hands trembled. "Mama?" Naya's voice drifted from the hallway. "You need help?" Tiffany opened her mouth to say no, to insist she was fine. But the words got stuck in her throat. Naya stepped into the room and immediately saw the wound. She didn't flinch, didn't gag, didn't run. She just walked over, sat beside her mother, and held her hand. "We'll clean it together," she said softly. "It's just a setback." Tiffany swallowed hard, blinking away tears. "I ran out of the good bandages. Then we'll use the others, and I'll pick more up after school." They worked in silence, Naya dabbing gently with warm saline, while Tiffany winced but didn't pull away. It hurt, but what hurt more was the look in her daughter's eyes, the quiet knowing of a child who had grown up too fast. When they finished, Tiffany leaned back, spent. "I'm tired, baby," she whispered. "I'm tired of hurting, of trying so hard and still feeling broken." Naya leaned against her shoulder. "But you're not broken. You're healing. That's harder." The words lingered in the air like incense. Tiffany closed her eyes, breathing them in. That evening she almost skipped the 3rd treatment. Her leg felt raw, her body heavy. Every part of her rebelled at the thought of more compression, more pressure, more routine. She stared at the machine like it was a punishment, not a tool. But then she caught her reflection in the dark TV screen across the room, disheveled. Hair, pale skin, eyes ringed with fatigue, and saw something else, defiance. This wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence. She strapped in, Naya set the timer, and the machine began its quiet hum again. That night, Tiffany slept through the night for the first time in months. It wasn't peaceful, her dreams were strange, fragments of memory and pain, but her body rested. When she woke, her pillow was dry, her sheets were dry, and for once, her leg didn't scream in protest. She called it a win. Still, the road ahead stretched long. The days blurred into each other, each one marked by treatments and measurements. Tiffany celebrated every small improvement, the slightly looser wrap, the reduced odor, the first time she could feel the floor beneath her foot without cringing. But not every day was progress. Some days the wounds looked worse. Some mornings the swelling refused to budge. She had flare-ups that brought her to tears, sessions where she had to stop halfway through because the pressure made her nauseous. And once, the machine malfunctioned mid-treatment, making a sharp grinding noise that sent Naya scrambling for the manual while Tiffany sat frozen, too afraid to move. They fixed it. They always found a way to fix it, but the emotional toll was constant. Tiffany found herself snapping more often, at herself, at the world, once even at Naya for accidentally misplacing a roll of gauze. She apologized immediately, but the shame lingered. One afternoon, as she sat alone after a particularly painful session, Tiffany pulled out her journal. A small, leather-bound notebook she hadn't touched since before the surgery years ago. She opened to a blank page. Day 18. I wanted to quit today. I told myself the pain was a sign to stop, but then Naya brought me tea without being asked. She sat beside me during treatment, even though I was grumpy. She told me I looked stronger. So I didn't quit. I'm writing this down so I don't forget that I didn't quit. She closed the notebook gently. That night, when Naya tucked the blanket over her legs, she whispered, "You're doing better, Mom. I can feel it." Tiffany looked at her daughter, so steady, so full of quiet courage, and whispered back, "I'm doing this for both of us." And she meant it. The fever came on quietly, like a whisper slipping through the cracks of Tiffany's resolve. It started with a chill, barely noticeable at first. She assumed it was just fatigue. Maybe she hadn't slept well, maybe she was dehydrated, but by mid-afternoon her body felt too heavy, her thoughts foggy, her skin prickled, and her breath came shallow, uneven. The compression device had just finished its second cycle of the day when Naya walked in and froze. "Mom, you're sweating." Tiffany blinked at her, disoriented. Her shirt clung to her back, soaked. She hadn't noticed. "I'm fine," she muttered. Naya stepped closer. Her forehead wrinkled. "No, you're not. Your cheeks are flushed." Tiffany tried to sit up straighter, but a wave of dizziness washed over her. Her stomach churned. The air in the room seemed thinner, too warm. She reached for her water bottle and nearly knocked it off the table. "I think I just need to rest a bit." But Naya was already pulling out the thermometer. "Don't argue," she said, pressing it against her mother's temple. A beep. Then another. 102.8, Naya read aloud, her voice trembling. "Mom, you have a fever. A bad one." Tiffany leaned her head back and closed her eyes. Her leg throbbed beneath the bandages, a deep, slow ache that pulsed with her heartbeat. She knew what this could mean. She remembered the last time, years ago, when a wound had become infected, and she'd ignored the signs until she'd landed in the hospital for 2 weeks on IV antibiotics. She couldn't go back there. Not again. "Get the first aid kit," she said, voice low. "We need to clean everything, rewrap. Then call Dr. Schaefer's office." Naya hesitated for a second too long, then sprang into action. The next 30 minutes were a blur. Naya gathered gauze, antiseptic, fresh wraps. Tiffany gritted her teeth as the old bandages were removed, revealing the angry red skin underneath. One wound had opened wider, the edges inflamed. It wept cloudy fluid. Tiffany forced her hands to stay steady as she cleaned the area. Every nerve in her body screamed. Her vision swam, but she kept going, refusing to let the fear pull her under. By the time Naya handed her the phone, her hands were shaking. She dialed the clinic, praying someone would answer. "Dr. Schaefer's office, this is Hannah." Tiffany closed her eyes. "This is Tiffany Howe. I have a fever. Over 102. The wounds are draining again. Something's not right." Hannah's tone shifted immediately. "Okay, thank you for calling. Let me patch Dr. Schaefer in. Can you stay on the line?" A minute later, his voice came through. "Tiffany, tell me everything," she explained quickly between breaths. The fever, the dizziness, the swelling, the color of the drainage. She felt like she was unraveling, but she forced her voice to stay calm. "Okay," Dr. Schaefer said, steady as ever. "You did the right thing by cleaning the area. This sounds like the early stages of a soft tissue infection, but because you caught it quickly, we can try to treat it aggressively at home first." Tiffany gripped the phone tighter. "You think I can avoid the hospital?" "I think we have a good chance, yes. I'm going to call in a prescription for oral antibiotics, broad spectrum, and I want you to monitor your temperature every 4 hours. Stay hydrated, rest. If the fever spikes again, or if you feel disoriented, you go to the ER immediately. Understand?" She nodded. "Yes, I'll check in with you personally tomorrow morning." When the call ended, Tiffany leaned her head against the back of the chair and let out a shaky breath. Naya sat silently beside her. "You're going to be okay," the girl said, but her voice wavered. "I know," Tiffany whispered. "I just needed to remember that." Later that night, as the antibiotics kicked in, the fever began to break. She still felt weak, but the fire in her skin receded. She sipped broth from a mug, held tight in both hands. Naya stayed by her side, reading quietly, occasionally glancing up to check the thermometer. By morning, Tiffany's temperature had dropped to 100.4. It wasn't over, but it was better. Dr. Schaefer called, just like he promised. She reported her progress, and he encouraged her to continue treatment with caution. "You did well, Tiffany," he said. "You didn't panic. You acted quickly. That's how you keep control over this disease, by not letting it dictate your reactions." When the call ended, Tiffany sat in silence, thinking. There had been a time, not long ago, when this kind of episode would have sent her spiraling, into despair, into defeat, into that place in her mind where escape seemed easier than endurance. But not this time. This time she had fought back, not just against the infection, but against the fear, and she had won. Recovery, it turned out, wasn't a straight line. It zigzagged, dipped, climbed again. But after the fever broke and the infection receded, something in Tiffany shifted, not just physically, but mentally. She had faced down the worst her body could throw at her, and she was still standing. By the third week of consistent treatment, the progress became undeniable. The swelling in her foot had reduced so much that her old compression socks actually slid off if she moved too quickly. The drainage had slowed to a near stop. The air in the house smelled clean again. And the wounds, those stubborn, angry lesions, had finally begun to close. Each morning, Naya helped unwrap the bandages with the careful hands of someone who had learned every inch of her mother's skin by heart. And each time Tiffany could see it. Less redness, tighter skin, new tissue forming. "You're healing," Naya whispered one morning, unable to hide her smile. Tiffany wanted to believe it. She still carried doubt like a shadow, always at her feet, but the facts were harder to argue with than feelings. And the facts said she was getting better. The numbers confirmed it too. One evening, after their final treatment of the day, Naya sat cross-legged on the floor with the fabric tape measure in hand. "Midfoot 41, she announced. "Down one more." Tiffany raised an eyebrow. "And the ankle?" Naya's face lit up. 28. "Mom, that's 11 centimeters down from when we started." Tiffany stared at her in disbelief. "Are you serious?" Naya turned the notebook around to show her. Every measurement, logged in neat handwriting. A tangible record of something that once felt impossible. The next morning, Tiffany stood up from the couch to head to the kitchen and forgot to reach for the wall. She didn't realize it until she was halfway across the room, walking unaided for the first time in over a year. She stopped in her tracks, looked back, and then looked at Naya, who had just stepped into the doorway holding a cup of tea. "You're walking," Naya said, voice caught between awe and joy. "I'm walking," Tiffany repeated, as if saying it aloud would make it real. It wasn't fast, it wasn't graceful, but it was hers. That weekend, Tiffany sat on the edge of her bed and opened the bottom drawer of her dresser. From beneath a stack of old clothes, she pulled out a box she hadn't opened in years. Inside were things she had tucked away during her decline: photos, a folded scarf, a pair of navy blue flats with small gold buckles. The shoes still had tags on them. She had bought them years ago, during one of the brief, hopeful phases after surgery, thinking she might wear them to church. But she never got the chance. The swelling returned. The shoes stayed in the box. She slid them out gently and placed them on the floor. Then, holding her breath, she slipped her left foot inside. It fit, snug but not tight. No pinching, no screaming nerves. Tiffany sat in stunned silence for a long moment, then let out a laugh. Short, breathless, disbelieving. Naya peeked into the room. "What's so funny?" "I'm wearing shoes," Tiffany said. "Real shoes." Naya gasped and ran over, kneeling down to look. "Oh my God, Mom, they're perfect." Tiffany stood slowly, adjusting to the sensation of having matching footwear for the first time in over a decade. She took a step, then another. Her balance was a little off, but she managed. "I want to go outside," she said suddenly. Naya looked at her with wide eyes. "Like, the porch?" "No, I mean yes, the porch, but also the park. The one a few blocks away." Naya hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I haven't felt this sure about anything in years." They picked a sunny Sunday afternoon. The sky was clear, the air warm but not oppressive. Tiffany dressed in a soft blue blouse, black slacks, and her brand new shoes. Naya insisted on bringing a blanket and a small picnic of sandwiches and lemonade. It was a short walk, no more than 2 blocks, but it felt like a pilgrimage. Tiffany moved slowly, her left leg still heavier than the right, but not unbearable. Neighbors she hadn't seen in months watched from porches, some waving, some blinking in surprise. One woman called out, "Called Tiffany? Is that you?" She smiled and waved back, not stopping, not explaining. By the time they reached the park, she was winded but exhilarated. They found a shady spot under an old oak tree, and Naya laid the blanket down. Tiffany sat, legs outstretched, shoes still on. Birds chirped in the trees above. Children's laughter echoed from the swings. For the first time in what felt like forever, the world didn't feel like something happening to her. It felt like something she was part of again. She took a sip of lemonade, then looked over at her daughter, who was watching her with a quiet kind of pride. "I almost forgot what this felt like," Tiffany said. "Being outside? No, being alive." Naya leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. "I'm glad you remembered." Something changed after that walk in the park. It wasn't just the fresh air or the sunlight, though both had felt like medicine after so many years indoors. It was the movement, the simple, sacred act of walking beside her daughter, upright, alert, part of the world again. Tiffany woke up the next morning with a kind of energy she hadn't felt in a long, long time. It started small. She got out of bed before Naya, made scrambled eggs, toasted 2 slices of bread, poured the orange juice. By the time her daughter wandered sleepily into the kitchen, Tiffany was already plating breakfast. "You cooked?" Naya asked, rubbing her eyes. "I figured it was my turn," Tiffany replied, trying to sound casual, but the pride was unmistakable in her voice. From there, the momentum grew. She cleaned out the hallway closet, started sorting old mail, began reading again, novels, not just medical forums. One afternoon, she pulled out her sewing kit and repaired a tear in Naya's backpack. Another day, she took out the trash on her own, carrying the bag all the way to the curb and back without stopping. She still needed rest. The treatments remained part of her daily rhythm. But now, the hours in between were filled with more than just survival. They were filled with living. A week later, Tiffany decided she wanted to go out, alone. It wasn't far, just the pharmacy a few blocks away. But the idea of walking there, browsing, paying for something herself, it stirred something in her chest, a kind of daring, a reminder of who she used to be. She told Naya, who hesitated at first, then nodded with a proud smile. "You've got this, Mom." Tiffany slipped on her now favorite navy blue flats, grabbed her purse, and headed out the door. The streets were familiar but strange, like visiting a childhood home after decades away. People she hadn't seen in months were out walking dogs, watering plants. Some waved, some did a double take. One man even said, "Well, I'll be damned. You're back on your feet, Miss Howe." She smiled and kept walking. Inside the pharmacy, the cool air and fluorescent lights wrapped around her. She wandered the aisles slowly, scanning shelves, picking up small things. She needed bandages, lotion, a bottle of her favorite hand soap. It was ordinary, beautifully, achingly ordinary. She was at the register when she heard the voice behind her. "Tiffany?" Her body stiffened. The cashier handed her the bag, but she barely registered it. She turned. Michael stood 2 feet away, older, leaner, his once dark hair now peppered with gray. He looked as surprised to see her as she was to see him. "Hey," he said, awkward smile tugging at his lips. "It's been a while." Tiffany nodded slowly. "That's one way to put it." Michael shoved his hands into his pockets. "I didn't know you still lived around here." I was in town visiting my sister. Just stopped in to grab something." He cleared his throat. "You look good." "Better." She raised an eyebrow. "Better than what?" "Than when you left?" He winced. "I deserved that." There was a long pause. "I heard about what happened," he said. "With your leg? I mean, I always knew it was tough, but I didn't realize how bad it got." Tiffany nodded again, slowly, measured. "It got bad, real bad." "I'm sorry," he said, voice soft. She looked at him, really looked at him. For years she had imagined this moment. In some versions she screamed at him, in others she collapsed into his arms. But now, standing here, she felt calm. She didn't need his guilt. She didn't need his approval. She didn't need anything from him. "I've been through hell, Michael," she said, "and I came out stronger. Not because of you, in spite of you." He nodded, looking down at the floor. "I get that. He hesitated. "I was wondering if maybe we could talk sometime. Grab coffee, catch up." Tiffany smiled, genuinely this time. "Thank you," she said. "But no." His eyes lifted. "No, I don't need to catch up. I'm not who I was when you left. And honestly, I like who I am now a whole lot more." Michael stepped back, visibly processing her words. Then he offered a slow, respectful nod. "Fair enough. I'm glad you're doing better, Tiffany. Truly." She watched him leave, the bell above the door jingling as it closed behind him. For a moment she stood there, still holding her pharmacy bag, her hands steady, her chest light. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't revenge. It was closure. She turned and walked back out into the afternoon sun, her steps slow but sure. Tiffany had spent years hiding. From people, from mirrors, from her own voice. But one evening, after the house had settled into a comfortable quiet and Naya was curled up on the couch doing homework, Tiffany opened her laptop. The screen glowed softly in the dim light. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating for just a second. Then she began to type. For a long time, I thought I was disappearing. I stopped going out. I stopped seeing people. I stopped believing in healing. But something changed. I decided to try one more thing, and then one more after that. This is what happened when I didn't give up. My name is Tiffany Howe. I'm 41. I live with lymphedema. And I'm healing. She uploaded 2 pictures, one of her foot at its worst, swollen and leaking, wrapped in layers of stained gauze. The other was taken just that morning, her foot bare, the skin smooth, the swelling minimal, the toes visible. She clicked post and held her breath. The message went live on a small online forum for chronic illness support, one she had visited often but never joined. She assumed a few people might glance at it. Maybe someone would comment. Maybe it would help just one person. She closed the laptop and went to bed. By morning, the post had over 300 likes, dozens of comments. This is the most hope I've felt in weeks. Thank you for being brave enough to share the photos. I thought I was alone. I didn't know anyone else had it this bad. Please tell us more. What kind of device are you using? Tiffany stared at the screen, stunned. These were strangers, people from across the country, maybe the world, connecting through shared pain, shared fight. She typed out answers, shared what she knew, and for the first time, her illness wasn't just something that had taken from her. It was something she could give back with. Within days, she was asked to write a guest post on a larger support group's blog, then another. Emails trickled in, kind and vulnerable, mothers, veterans, elderly patients, people living in silence, now suddenly speaking up. She felt something growing in her that she hadn't dared to name in years. Purpose. One morning, she printed out a screenshot of her post and pinned it to the refrigerator. When Naya saw it, her eyes widened. You wrote that? I did. And you posted your foot picture online? Naya smirked. Tiffany chuckled. Not exactly my dream modeling debut, but yes. I'm proud of you, Mom. Tiffany smiled. I'm proud of me too. That weekend, Naya came home with a flyer clutched in her hand. It's next Friday, she said. Awards night. At school. Tiffany tilted her head. You're getting an award? Naya tried to look casual, but the grin gave her away. For academic achievement and community service. That's incredible, honey. There's a little ceremony. Just an hour. You don't have to come. I know crowds are still hard. Tiffany stopped her. Of course I'll come. The school auditorium hadn't changed since the last time Tiffany had been there, when Naya was, in elementary school, singing This Land Is Your Land off-key with a paper flag in her hand. The floors still creaked, the seats were still too small, and the lighting was still unflattering. But this time, Tiffany walked in with confidence. She wore a soft green dress and her favorite flats. Her leg was wrapped under compression garments, but no one could tell. She didn't limp, she didn't sweat, she didn't panic. She sat in the 3rd row, surrounded by other parents, and held her head high. When Naya's name was called, Tiffany stood and clapped the loudest. After the ceremony, students mingled with their families in the hallway, taking photos and laughing. Tiffany stood to the side, letting Naya bask in the spotlight, chatting with friends, holding her certificate. Eventually, Naya walked over and held up her phone. Photo? She asked. They stood side by side, arms wrapped around each other. Naya took a quick selfie, then turned the screen to show her. I love this one, she said. Tiffany looked at the photo. Her face was bright, her smile real. Her daughter beside her, radiant with pride. They looked like a team. Survivors, warriors, you know, Tiffany said quietly. I didn't think I'd ever be in one of these pictures again. Naya leaned her head against her mother's. I always knew you would. On the way home, Tiffany didn't use her cane. She didn't need to. They walked slowly under the amber streetlights, arms swinging gently, the air crisp and full of promise. At the front door, Tiffany paused and looked up at the stars. She used to watch them through a window, from behind curtains, from a chair she thought might be her forever prison. Now she stood beneath them. I'm back, she whispered. Not the same woman, stronger, better. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Tiffany was sipping coffee at the kitchen table, sunlight pouring through the window, a soft breeze stirring the curtain. Her inbox, usually full of appointment reminders and spam, had something new, a subject line that made her. Pause, Community Health and Resilience Forum, guest speaker invitation. She blinked at the screen. The message was from a local nonprofit that hosted monthly events for chronic illness awareness and education. They had read her blog post, seen her photos, and wanted her to speak at their next event. In front of people. On a stage. With a microphone. Her stomach twisted. The thought of standing under bright lights, of exposing not just her leg but her vulnerability to an entire room, made her breath catch. She had come so far, but had she come far enough to do this? That evening she showed Naya the email. Her daughter's eyes lit up immediately. "Mom, this is amazing." Tiffany hesitated. "It's terrifying." Naya sat beside her. "Yeah, it is. But you're not the same woman you were. You've walked through fire and came out whole. You have something to say." Tiffany looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking. That surprised her. "You think it'll matter?" she asked quietly. Naya didn't hesitate. "I think your story could change someone's life." The auditorium was small but warm. Folding chairs, a modest stage, soft overhead lighting. The morning of the event, Tiffany stood backstage, palms damp, notes trembling in her hands. She had rehearsed, but the words felt slippery now, elusive. She wore a knee-length dress with a floral pattern and low heels, not to hide her leg, but to celebrate it. The compression wrap beneath matched her skin tone. It wasn't invisible, but it didn't need to be. She peeked through the side curtain. There were about 80 people seated, some young, some elderly, some in wheelchairs, some with walkers, all waiting. When the host introduced her, applause rose like a wave. Tiffany stepped onto the stage, heart pounding, every cell alive with fear and something else she hadn't named yet. Maybe anticipation, maybe courage. She stood at the podium, adjusted the mic, and took a breath. "My name is Tiffany Howe," she began, "and for a long time, I thought my life was over." Silence. Every face focused, every eye on her. She spoke of her diagnosis, of the swelling, of the shame. She told them about the 60 pounds of fluid removed in 2006, the open wounds, the smell, the isolation. She described nights spent crying on the floor, too tired to crawl back to bed. She spoke of Naya, of almost giving up, and of the pump, how something so simple, so mechanical, gave her a second chance. As she spoke, she noticed heads nodding, tears being wiped discreetly, hands reaching for others. "I used to think healing meant returning to who I was before," she said, voice steady now. "But now I know healing is becoming someone new, someone stronger." The room was quiet when she finished. Then, as if in slow motion, a ripple of applause began. Soft at first, then louder, fuller, rising from every corner of the room. She felt it wash over her, not just as praise but as connection. Someone in the front row stood. Then another, and another, a standing ovation. Tiffany stood there for a moment, stunned. Then she stepped away from the mic and walked down into the crowd. People came forward, strangers who weren't strangers anymore. They told her their own stories, their own wounds, their own hidden battles. "You gave me hope," one woman whispered, clutching Tiffany's hand. Tiffany smiled through tears. "You already had it. You just needed to see it." That day, she didn't feel like a patient. She felt like a survivor, a teacher, a witness to what the human spirit could endure and overcome. And for the first time, she believed it all had meaning. The days after the event passed in a gentle whirlwind. Tiffany's inbox filled with messages, more than she'd ever received in her life. Not just from the audience members, but from people across the country who had seen the recording of her speech shared online. Someone had posted a clip to a support group, and from there it spread. Quietly, but steadily, like the ripple of a stone dropped into water. Messages came from mothers like her, from widowers, from teenagers struggling with their first diagnosis. Some had lymphedema, some had other invisible illnesses. All of them were looking for something to hold on to. And somehow, her story had become that thing. She answered every message, slowly, intentionally, not with platitudes or medical advice, but with truth. "I don't have all the answers," she wrote in one email, "but I do know this, you are not alone." A week later, a new email appeared, this one from a small publishing house that specialized in patient narratives, memoirs from survivors, caregivers, advocates. They had read her posts, watched her speech, and they had a question. "Have you ever considered writing a book?" Tiffany stared at the message for a long time. She thought about all the years when her life had shrunk down to the four walls of her home, when her voice felt like it had disappeared, when she didn't believe she had anything worth saying. And now someone wanted to put her words on paper. Permanently. The idea terrified her. And yet, it lit something inside her. That night, after Naya had gone to bed, Tiffany sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and created a new document. The screen glowed blank and inviting. She placed her hands on the keys, and for a moment, just sat there, breathing. Then she began to type. Chapter 1. I didn't lose my leg. I found my life. Her fingers moved slowly at first, then with growing confidence. She wrote about the girl she'd been, about the fear, the shame, the slow unraveling. But she also wrote about resilience, about Naya, about the night she almost gave up, and the morning she didn't. She didn't aim for perfection, she aimed for honesty, and it felt good. At one point, her hand drifted to her leg, resting gently over the place where so much pain had once lived. The skin there was still marked, still rough in places. The scars hadn't vanished, but they no longer felt like open wounds. They felt like proof. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked and someone laughed. Life went on, ordinary and beautiful. And Tiffany wrote on. Not to relive the pain, but to honor the journey. Not to dwell in the past, but to give someone else a future. As midnight approached, she saved the document and leaned back in her chair. Her body was tired, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that came after doing something meaningful. She looked around the room. A cup of herbal tea sat half-finished. A photo of Naya at age 5 grinned from the bookshelf. The compression device sat tucked beneath the desk, no longer a symbol of restriction, but of movement, of freedom. She had found herself in pieces, scattered across years of struggle, and slowly, quietly, she had put herself back together. Piece by piece, word by word, scar by scar. When she finally turned off the light and climbed into bed, she felt lighter than she had in years. Not because her leg had healed completely, it hadn't. Not because the journey was over, it wasn't. But because she knew who she was now. And more importantly, she knew she mattered. As she drifted to sleep, her final thought was not about pain or loss, but about strength and gratitude, because in the end, it wasn't the illness that defined her, it was the choice to keep living anyway. Sometimes the greatest battles aren't the ones people see, but the ones we fight in silence. Tiffany's journey is a reminder that healing isn't about returning to the person we were. It's about discovering the strength in who we're becoming. Picture this, a mother and daughter, standing side by side at sunset. Her scars no longer symbols of pain, but of victory. What about you? Have you ever walked through something that changed you forever? We'd love to hear your story in the comments. Your words might be the light someone else needs. And if you found something in this story that moved you, hope, strength, even just a moment of connection, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who might need it today. Because sometimes, all it takes is one story to help someone stand again.